Welcome to Universal God Message of Peace, and I'm Lee Weissman, and this is Lale Tuncer, and that's Dr. Khalid Zaheer, and we have a weekly Abrahamic discussion. And this week, the topic is: do we have a conscience, and if so, what do we do with it? So I'm responsible for this topic, and I'm going to tell you it's a very, very difficult one. So to give you an idea of how difficult, so I did what any good scholar would do when approaching a topic like this. What did I do? Is I Googled, okay, Judaism conscience, just to see, right? Very smart move, don't you think? Well, what's the first thing that comes up is a quote from Adolf Hitler. Okay, that's not a good sign. That's definitely not a good sign. So the quote was, conscience was an invention of the Jews. Conscience was an invention of the Jews, and just like circumcision, it was a blemish on mankind. I thought, okay, this is a very bad start. This is a very, very bad start. Um, and then I thought to myself, well, okay, like, how do you say conscience in Hebrew? I think that's always a good place to start, right? And I thought, well, I have no idea. That's not good news, right? It's not good news to be talking about something, a religious concept that has no name. So I looked up the word in modern Hebrew. Okay, modern Hebrew is called matzvun. I thought, well, okay, that's a word I don't think I've ever seen before. Now, have seen tsafuna. I've heard, so I kind of I spent some time with this, and here is what I came up with. Okay, so first let's talk about normal psychology for a second. I'm gonna talk about conscience in the context um of Jewish psychological theory. So let's start out with the basic theory. So the basic theory is that human beings are creatures that are at war with themselves. So that is to say that we have two sides to us. We have what we call a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara. We have a good inclination and an evil inclination. Now, the evil inclination um, is a little complicated. So in the Talmud, it asks a question. It says that and one of the days of creation, God says, God says that day, every day God says is good, 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 good. Tov, tov, tov. And one day he says is tov ma'od, is very good. So the rabbis asked the question and says, what is this ma'od? What is this extra good on that day? And says, aha, this was the creation of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So then they asked the question, said, well, wait a second, how can you call the evil inclination tov, good? He says, well, because if it were not for the evil inclination, we would have, nobody would ever have a family. Nobody would ever build a house. Nobody would ever have a business. Nobody would ever do anything. So that the evil inclination is not necessarily something which is bad, but it's something which is instinctual. It's something which is it's the juice of life. It's that animal side of us that it's that animal side of us that motivates us, right? To do a lot of things in the world. Some of them not so good, and some of them good, right? But it is instinctual. It is instinctual. And then on the other side, there is this Yetzer Tov. There's this there's this positive spiritual side to us. Now, the conscience, you could say, well, okay, maybe the conscience kind of lives on that good side, right? So we have this kind of Yetzer Tov, which maybe is something like a conscience, right? It's kind of a kind of inner movement towards something which is good and something which is healthy, right? And then we have this other side coming on the other side, and these two things are in tension with each other. These two things are kind of in a kind of a higher self and a lower self. And that there's a lot of different kinds of terminologies for that. Sometimes that higher self is called the seichel, it's called the intellect, right? And that intellect, right? That higher intellect, or the da'at, sometimes knowledge, right? That's something which informs our behavior and changes our behavior, and that functions as kind of conscience. So I'm going to call that our kind of natural conscience. Okay? I'm making up a new term. We're going to call that our natural conscience. That we have kind of built into us, um, a kind of inclination to good. Now okay, so we know, for example, in biology or education, where we talk about nature versus nurture. Okay, so that's the nature part of it, right? That we have this kind of natural inclination towards towards the instinctive and intuitive, which sometimes leads us to bad. And we have this more elevated side to us that leads us to good. Um, and and that's natural. But of course, anything that we have naturally can also be developed and nurtured, right? Just like I might have a natural ability to be an athlete. I don't. Okay, just pointing out, I don't. Not at all. I have no natural ability to be an athlete. But if I did, right, it wouldn't mean a lot unless I developed it, right? It would be nice to have, but it's something that I could nurture. And if I trained myself and I went to the gym, right, if I taught myself how to play a sport and all of those things, then I would be taking that natural talent and I would be developing it. And the same thing happens with both of these yitzrot, with both of these sides to us. We can educate and expand that negative side, or we can educate and expand that more positive side, right? So on the one hand, it's natural, right? It has a natural existence, but like all natural things, right? It can be nurtured, or it can be starved out, right? It would be possible to reduce, for example, one's negative side, one's kind of instinctive side. We could reduce that, right? Through various means, various kinds of practices and things like that. We can reduce that. And alternatively, we're able to enhance that good side of us, right? By doing various things, we can enhance good things. Right? So good deeds, right? To do good, to do kindness, right? That enhances and strengthens that good side, right? And to deprive ourselves, right? A kind of asceticism, for example, would be a way of kind of depriving that other side and weakening that other side. So I'm going to call that a kind of natural conscience, that Yetzer Tov, that Yetzer Tov, that would be a um, uh, that would be a kind of natural conscience. Now then, I'm going to call there's, I think, a kind of supernatural conscience. Now, I'm not sure that these two things are necessarily exclusive to each other. Um, but so I'm thinking about it. Now, if you were to ask anybody, to find one verse in the Torah, one verse in Tanakh, right, in the entire Jewish scriptures, to speak about conscience, I think 99% would choose exactly the same verse. And it's a verse from the first book of Kings, from the prophet Eliyahu Navi, the prophet Elijah. And the prophet Elijah, um, the voice of God comes to him. And first I have to remember my mind. First there's a fire, then there's an earthquake, then there's a wind, and it says, and God was not, and God's voice was not in the fire, and God's voice was not in the wind, and God's voice was not in the earthquake. And then there was a call, dmama daka. There was a still small voice, and God's voice was in the still small voice. And that's where most people would see the idea of a conscience, and that it's something supernatural. It is the voice of God, and that sometimes we have access to a voice of God within us that is very, very quiet. That's that is not loud and it's not loud or even persuasive. It's just there. And we have the option of listening to it or not. And I think that conscience is our kind of what I would call our supernatural conscience. I don't mean to say that we're at the level of prophecy or anything like that. That's an entirely different kind of communication. But that we have an inner sense sometimes of what it is, what it is that God wants from us. And it comes in this quiet voice, and it's very easy to drown it out. It's very easy to drown out. I think that the reason why he uses this expression of called mamavdaka, that is this a quiet, still, um, almost silent voice, is because it's so easy to ignore it. It's so easy to kind of drown it out with with other things. And this, I think, is this when Jewish texts talk about the tzafun, the thing which is hidden inside of us, right? That's the word that's used, matzfun. The word modern word for conscience in Hebrew comes from a word that means hidden. Um, it's something it's a quiet small thing that's hidden inside of us, but that it has a kind of divine origin. It's a constant whispering of God, so to speak, to direct us in the ways that we should go. And the question is whether we're listening. And we see again and again especially in the Psalms of David where he talks about waiting. He talks about waiting. So what is he waiting for? What he talks about waiting. I wait for you, I wait for you, I wait for you, I wait for you. Um, by the way, the word kaveh, to wait, is actually related to the Arabic word taqwa. Taqwa. It means tikva in Hebrew means hope. Right? So to hope, to anticipate, to wait, to be aware, right? All those things are related to each other. He says, I wait on God. I sit in awareness. What is he waiting for? He's waiting for, he's waiting for that voice. He's waiting for that inspiration. He's waiting um, for God to give him direction. And so well, conscience, I think that conscience is not, and this is, I guess, coming to the point, conscience is not just something that everybody has, and it's all the same, and it's not. It's something that one, on the natural side, you either develop or you don't develop. And on the supernatural side, you either invite it or you don't invite it, or you listen to it or you don't listen to it. So if I have to give myself advice, okay, I can only give myself advice on this. If I have to give myself advice, it is to pay more attention to those inner promptings. And when they come, to be careful not to drown them out, to be careful not to coat them over with rationalizations, not to, but but to feel them. And I think very often our conscience takes the form of guilt, right? And guilt has gotten a very bad rap in our world today. Right? People don't like to feel guilty. You know, it's partially because we confuse guilt with shame, right? Shame is something that we feel about who we are. Guilt is something we feel about something we've done. We should never feel ashamed of who we are. We should never feel ashamed to be human. We should never feel ashamed to be, to be me. With whatever problems I have, whatever shortcomings I have, I shouldn't be ashamed to be me. I don't deserve that. It's not fair, right? And it's not good because I won't be able to function as a human being if I'm ashamed of myself. But to feel guilt, to look at yourself and to say, I messed up. To understand, to say, you know what, I messed up and I messed up again and again and again and again. I says that I think is often the voice of conscience. And too often, too often too often we dismiss it, or we drown it out, or we replace it with rationalizations, or we kind of set it aside. Um, or I noticed many years ago, I used to have a very long commute. I used to have a very long commute. I used to drive like 3 hours a day to work. First, it was an hour a day, then it got to be 2 hours in Los Angeles. The traffic was terrible. And and I noticed that that every once in a while I would turn on the car radio. And I thought to myself, like, why do I turn on the car radio? Like, on what prompts me to turn on the car radio? So I thought to myself, let's do an experiment. I'm gonna try to be conscious every time I turn on the car radio. So what I discovered is every time I had an uncomfortable thought, every time I had a prompting of my conscience about something, I would turn on the car radio to distract myself. And some people do that with smoking. Some people do it with all sorts of things. Some people do it with drinking. Some people do it with just talking to other people, right? They distract themselves. So one is to pay attention, right? Is to realize that you do have these inner voices and they are very quiet. And these promptings are very quiet. Um, and to listen to them, pay attention to them, don't dismiss them. And second, to work on that natural conscience, to work on those really good parts of yourself and to develop them, develop them, give them lots of room to grow. And between those two things, I'm going to call that a conscience. And I think that's what it means to kind of grow and develop your conscience. That's all I have to say.
Wow, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
I hope it made some sense because
It was wonderful. Yeah, it's a very big topic. So I think you did really, really well. And thank you so, so much. Do you have any questions, Dr. Zaheer, for Rabbi
Yes,
Weissman?
it is. It was really very deep, and actually, it made me think. And one of the things that I realize, and I think it's a very valid point, is that this uh, voice of God inside us very quiet, and it really needs to be heard. And what he mentioned, and it really is very important to consider that it can be very easily ignored. I mean, it's not there to just shout loudly to force us to do what is desired. It's there to let us know that it's there, and if we care to give value to it, to give it serious consideration, it's going to respond. And this it's a very valid point, very important point, honestly, that we really need to develop, and it has to be a conscious effort to strengthen what we have with us naturally, and conscience uh, is is something which you can make stronger, or you can make it weak, and maybe at times it can disappear as well. And one of the problems which he has rightly pointed out is that because it's quite often associated with with guilt, and people don't like guilt.
Right.
So it's ignored. It's almost despised. Uh, and at the beginning part, what he mentioned is also very important. That as humans, we do have this side of us, which, if it was not there, probably we wouldn't have been living. I mean, we have desires, we have very strong inclinations, and we live a good life. We have a family, we do business, we enjoy because of what we have within us as an inclination towards uh, satisfying these desires, etc. But conscience comes to play a role uh, when this desire is taken beyond the limits, is uh, is challenged, and honestly, it really is a great asset to have. But as he's rightly pointed out, this asset has to be valued and it has to be uh, strengthened, nurtured, and it's only then that we as humans can benefit from it. So yeah, it really was, it was a deep presentation on a topic subject which really is deep and really deserves to be given a real good thought. Thank you very much for making me think about it.
So now you have a whole week to think about it.
That's right. That's a good
You have a whole week.
advantage. That's true. That's true.
Do you have any questions, Dr. Zaheer, for Rabbi Weissman?
You say what you want to say, and I'll think about it.
Okay. I was hoping you would, and then I could have more time to think about it. No, I've written down some notes. It's such a big topic, isn't it? I do have a couple of questions. Okay. We were talking you mentioned about intellect, and so the higher self and the lower self, and how we're sort of in this battle. But my question is, what is our true nature? Is the intellect part of our true nature? Should we be using the intellect to overcome the lower self, or should we be embracing the lower self and be aware that actually sometimes the intellect can get in the way of being our truer self? I'm just a bit confused whether, because intellect can sometimes get in the way, can't it? Or can it? I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, yes, and yes. To answer your question, I mean, I think the answer, look, I think that, that the idea is to let, first of all, the problem is with this word intellect.
Mm.
And, the word in Hebrew, intellect, this word seichel, right? So it doesn't mean intellect in the same way that we usually use it, right? It means a kind of like a higher way of thinking, a thinking a thinking that kind of okay. So I'll use the analogy of I think it's from Rumi. Imagine you have this ant, right? And the ant is walking on the Persian rug, right? The ant is walking on the Persian rug. What is the ant going to see, right? The ant is going to see a color, a color, a color, a color, a color, a color, right? The ant is just kind of wandering around seeing color. But if you take the ant and you can take the ant and you can put him up on a ladder, right? And he can look down at the rug that he was just crawling on, he's going to see that it has a pattern to it, right? So he's changed his perspective, right? So that's the perspective of the seichel, the perspective of this higher mind.
Like an awareness.
is an awareness of is an awareness of the bigger picture, right? An awareness of the bigger picture. And when it comes with the intellect, as we normally talk about the rational intellect, well, sometimes that actually can be a more narrow picture, right? Sometimes that narrows our focus too much, right? That can be that can also be a stumbling block. We all know people who kind of think their way, who think their way through life, and just thinking your way through life is could be painful, right? Could be really painful and very limiting.
And also,
So,
yeah, if we're always constantly trying to understand the reason why we have to follow a certain commandment, for example, and if we're relying on our intellect and we're saying, well, unless I can understand it, I'm not going to follow this commandment,
right,
and that
right,
can sometimes, I think, get in the way, don't you think? Or
that kind of, you know, that could be very damaging, right? Especially because those are things those are things which can be very helpful to you. Like, if I went to a gym, and I tried to figure out exactly what every single exercise was doing, maybe I would be so focused on that I wouldn't actually get any exercise done. You know, I mean, or maybe it's going to be beyond my understanding. I take a bunch of medications. I'm at that age where you take a lot of medications. If I tried to understand how each of those medications worked, right? If I said, okay, I'm not taking any medication until I understand exactly how it works, I would spend all of my time, I'd have to become a pharmacologist, before I took any medicine. And that's not going to be practical.
see, this is the I think this is the issue in my head. I'm thinking there's many people who say, well, I want to understand first and then I will obey. Because we were talking about obedience being, part of returning to God and um, what should we be obeying and what should we not be obeying? So there's something called blind faith, and should we just follow a commandment without understanding why we're doing it? So our intellect might tell us to do the opposite. Um, but should we be obeying it? So where does faith come in? And
Well, now
does
you
that
have a
the point?
whole, see, now
Mm.
you have a whole different
Yeah,
topic.
yeah.
I mean,
A bit
no,
like
I mean, this is also a very good topic. I mean, the role of, so the word seichel, I guess kind of the Arabic equivalent would probably be akal, probably
mm,
be, probably that's the Arabic equivalent, and it may even be related somehow. But, um, and given that that is like our unique, uh, that is the thing that makes us human, right? That of all of God's creatures, we are the only one that has that. And that thinking and reflecting are clearly part of what it means to serve God. And it's really important that you it's hard to imagine any kind of service of God that wouldn't include that intellect. And it's dangerous to exclude it,
yeah.
right? It's dangerous to exclude it because what you're saying is, here, God, you gave me this unique gift, right? You gave me this amazing gift that no other creature has, and I'm not going to use it,
Oh
right?
yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you, that it's important to use our intellect. But then you've got, we see that Abraham, peace be upon him, was given commandments to do things that would go against the intellect.
Right,
But
right.
he followed them because he listened to that voice. And I think sometimes the confusion can be that the voice can tell you to do something that doesn't make sense. But the question is, should we be following it? And how do we know whether it is really the voice of God or if it's the voice of Shaitan or, like our evil inclination? And I think my understanding is that mankind forgets. We sometimes lose way, we're not quite sure, actually. And I think that's why maybe the scripture was given to us and the prophets were sent to remind us, to try to help guide us back to that voice and to help guide us back to, you know, um, but then at what point, again, when you're looking at scripture, people say, oh, how do I know that that's, the truth? My intellect tells me that it's not the truth. These were stories given to, the olden days and blah, blah, blah. So this is the issue. I'm just thinking like, I think unless we make time for prayer, perhaps. That's my next question. How does prayer and mindfulness and meditation, what role do they play in helping us to reconnect with that voice in that sort of?
Well, yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to make time and place. You have to. And it's important to make time and place. To be able to pay attention, right? To be able to listen. And to be able and to be you can't get we talked about guidance before. I mean, you can't receive the guidance unless you open your ears. As long as you have your fingers in your ears, right, you're not going to get any guidance. And part of it is when we hear those voices and when we hear those promptings of the heart, right, we have to pay attention. We have to give time and place to that. Right? There has to be, and that's why prayer is so important, and particularly to pray for that and say, listen, I need guidance. I need a conscience. That's how we got in this whole discussion, was talking about guidance. I need an inner guidance system. I need a kind of I need my inner GPS to be on, so that I have a good idea of where it is that I have to go. And then when it's on, I have to listen to it. And even if I don't listen to it, even if I don't listen to it, at least know that it's there, and that's
Yeah.
guilt. A person can do what's not right, but that guilt, that guilt is at least a little, that at least tells them that, the GPS is still on, the conscience is still working, right? And it's important not to disable it, right? You don't want to disable your conscience.
Is it possible to kill the conscience if one keeps ignoring it and covering it over and turning away from that voice and keep
Sure.
repeating the same mistakes over and over again? So is it
Sure.
possible to kill our conscience, or is it always there? It's just covered over?
I think people can. I think people, well, I doubt that you can really kill it. I doubt that you can really kill it. I think that you can drown it out. Um, I, you always hear these stories of people who have this experience, where they just get completely lost and they do whatever. And then something happens, right? They bottom out. They have some bottoming out experience. And in that experience, all of a sudden the voice of conscience is heard, right?
It's
Which
like they
means it was there all the time, but they just weren't in a position to be able to pay attention to it. So I don't think we can ever really kill it. Although, I think a lot of people have tried. I mean, I think, the point that I started out with the quote from Hitler. I mean, what Hitler was saying was, he wasn't talking just about Judaism. He's also talking about Christianity and about Islam. He said, listen, these religions, right, have introduced this idea of some innate good. Well, I'm telling you that good is what I tell you it is, right? That what's good is what's good for the fatherland. What's good is what I tell you it is, and I get to be the arbiter of good, not some inner sense that you have. Let your inner sense go, and because people's inner sense would say, "Oh my God, what are you asking me to do? Really? You're asking me to do that? No, I can't do it." Right? So he wanted to disable the conscience. And I don't know that you can completely do that, but you can certainly partially do that. And I think that's what, high control groups and things like that, that's part of what that's part of their job, right? Is to kind of is to disconnect your conscience so that they can become your conscience, so that they can tell you what it is that you should do rather than you telling yourself.
Oh, wow. Have you thought of any questions, Dr. Zaheer?
I don't know. I was thinking about your question of um, intellect when it is challenged, when a religious verdict is confronted, is uh, is to be followed, and the intellect is not uh, understanding what exactly is the rationale behind it. Um, I think I am not very fond of calling it blind faith. I think it is a well understood faith in that you are accepting a higher authority for good reasons. You have applied your intellect, you have made use of your inner abilities honestly and genuinely to come to the conclusion that this source that you have accepted is superior to you. So,
Mhm.
you know, when I'm learning from a teacher, a mentor, I I do have this confidence. I will ask questions most certainly, but I do have this confidence that whatever he or she is telling is is actually coming from a source which is superior to me. And I did not accept it blindly. I actually went through a process and realized at some stage that oh, this is superior, and therefore I have to just follow it. And while I'm following it, even when I'm not understanding, I try to understand because the possibility of understanding is going to make my obedience more meaningful, and it will have, I think, greater spirit in it, and it will add to my confidence that what I'm doing is right. That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, that's a whole different discussion, but a really interesting discussion. Is, like how important is it to understand what it is that you're doing? Because I think that what you said is absolutely true, and that is that when the more you understand, the more you invest in it, right? There are certainly things that I do. So here's yeah, I'll okay, let's see, there's a picture of my rabbi up there. See, right on the top there, it's my rabbi. And there were things that my rabbi taught me that I just do because I considered him to be my mentor, for good reason, for good reason, based on my seichel, based on my intellect, I came to the conclusion that he knows a lot more than I do. And there are things he told me to do that I really don't necessarily understand, and I do them. And um, and I have some idea of what their basis is and things like that. It's not like they're so outlandish, but I understand them. But the more I understand the background and the more I understand them more deeply, the more I appreciate them. And the more I appreciate them, you know, the more of me is invested in doing those things. Um, so yeah, the blind, you know, I think that, it should be, I guess Thomas Aquinas, called it faith-seeking understanding. That there's some things we do on faith, but then we seek the understanding because the understanding is going to be what gives life, what gives life to what we do, right? If I understand something, the more I understand something, the more deeply I understand it, um,
Mm.
the more I'm going to be able to invest in it. The more of me I get to invest in it.
Yes, that's
That's right.
good. I agree as well. I think there's a point where we can surrender to seeking higher truth. And then when that truth, we need to use our intellect and reason to seek it. And then once it enters into our hearts, and then at that point it sort of changes. And a little bit like, I guess, with the scripture, if you're seeking the truth of a scripture, and you research into it and you read it and you think about it and you're not quite sure, there might be a bit of doubt in your mind, But then there might be a point where you think, well, actually, no, I believe in this and I believe in all of it, even the parts that I don't understand. And once that enters your heart, then you might be willing to obey the commandments or whatever, that you find in there, even before you understand it, but you're seeking to understand it at the same time. And I think it's a process, really, isn't it? And they're both.
I think it's a good next topic.
Yes, it is
Just
actually.
never say that. Better you than me for saying that. Okay. Next topic he
Right.
chooses.
Well,
We see what I do with it. It's like, heaven help me.
next week, we're looking forward to hearing, carrying on this discussion and hearing your perspective on this topic of conscience, Dr. Zaheer. Thank you
I've
so,
got a full week to think about. Yeah, thank you.
thank you so, so much, Rabbi
Okay.
Weissman. An amazing discussion, amazing talk. God
Don't
bless.
forget to like, subscribe.
Yes, please do like,
That's right.
subscribe, and share. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
everyone
very
for watching.
Bye.
Shalom.
much. Shalom.